Welcome back, horror lovers, or if you're new here, welcome to the family. Tonight's story isn't just another scary tale, it's a chilling reminder that sometimes the people who know us best aren't always our friends. If you want the full horror thrill, make sure you watch until the very end, because every detail matters in this nightmare. And before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss the next time darkness knocks at your door. Alright, let's step into the story. Asterisk. I thought the worst of it was behind me after I left that house. I told myself the past couldn't follow me forever, that I just needed a new start, something quieter, smaller, manageable. That's when I moved back to my hometown. Not because I wanted to, but because my mom needed me. She was getting older, her balance failing her more often, and she refused to admit it. I couldn't just watch from a distance. I wanted to be close enough to help when she needed me. Close enough that I could sleep at night without worrying if she had fallen and couldn't get up. I found a duplex about 20 minutes from her place. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A living room with creaky floorboards, a tiny kitchen that always smelled faintly of old wood, 2 bedrooms, though one I used mostly for storage. It gave me a kind of independence while still keeping me close to her. And for a little while, life seemed steady again. My mom had always been stubborn. When I brought up the idea of a medical alert system, just something simple she could press in case she fell, she waved me off. I'm fine. You worry too much. But I knew she wasn't fine. I'd seen her trip, seen her stumble, and though she laughed it off, the image of her lying on the floor alone haunted me. It became this constant knot in my stomach, one I could never quite untangle. That night, the knot tightened into something else entirely. It was late, around 9, and I had just settled in on the couch with the TV humming low. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, local, so I picked up. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. A woman, identifying herself as a nurse from the emergency room at the local hospital. She told me my mother had been brought in an hour earlier, that she had fallen, hit her head, but was conscious and asking for me. My heart stopped. This was the call I had dreaded every day since I moved back. I didn't doubt her for a second. She knew my mom's full name. She knew her address. She even mentioned the hip replacement surgery from a few months back. I didn't question it. I didn't think to. I just grabbed my keys and bolted out the door, forgetting even to lock it behind me. The drive was a blur. My hands shook on the wheel, my foot heavy on the gas. I prayed silently, begged for her to be all right, replayed every moment of her stubbornness, every warning I'd brushed aside. I thought about the way she had laughed the last time I tried to convince her to take precautions, and how I should have pushed harder. When I stormed through the ER doors and gave her name, the nurse behind the desk frowned. She tapped at her computer, checked, rechecked, then looked back at me. No record. No one admitted under that name, no recent fall, nothing. I felt the floor tilt under me. I explained again, said I had just gotten a call from a nurse, that she had told me everything, her name, her address, her surgery. The receptionist shook her head. She was kind but firm. There was no record of my mother being treated that night. Confusion tangled with panic as I stepped outside and dialed her landline. She answered after a few rings, groggy, her voice soft with sleep. "Why are you calling so late?" she asked. She hadn't been to the hospital. She hadn't fallen. She was fine. That was when the realization hit like ice. The call hadn't been real. It had been a setup. Someone had wanted me out of the house. I tore back to my car, anger and fear battling for space inside me. My tires screeched as I flew down the roads, praying I was wrong, praying I'd find everything exactly as I'd left it. But when I pulled into the driveway, I knew before I even opened the door. The air inside was wrong, heavy, thick with the scent of intrusion. My living room was gutted. My TV gone. My laptop vanished. Drawers overturned, closets emptied, the pieces of my life scattered like trash. But the worst part wasn't what was missing. It was what had been chosen. The frames on my shelves had been left behind, but the photos were gone. The images of my family, my childhood, stripped out and stolen. My prescription bottles, emptied from the bathroom cabinet. They had taken things that weren't valuable to anyone but me. Things that made no sense for a thief. I stood frozen, staring at the empty frames, the gutted shelves, the bare spots where pieces of my life had been. It wasn't robbery. It was something else. Something colder, more personal. I called the police. But even as I gave them every detail, I knew it was pointless. They listened. They nodded, they wrote it down, but their eyes said what I already felt. There was nothing they could do. Whoever had come into my house hadn't just stolen objects. They had taken pieces of me. And now they knew they could lure me out with a single phone call. That night, I sat in the ruins of my living room, the empty frames glowing in the lamplight, and for the first time I realized the truth. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about luck. Someone out there knew me, knew my mom, knew enough to walk straight into my life and rip it apart. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't finished. I didn't sleep at all that night. I couldn't. The house felt hollow, gutted not just of my things but of every trace of safety I had ever felt inside it. I kept pacing, staring at the empty frames like they were open wounds, wondering what kind of person steals family photographs. Jewelry I could understand. Electronics fine. But pictures? Medicine bottles with my name on them? That wasn't theft. That was something else. Something twisted. The police had left after doing what they could, which wasn't much. They suggested I change the locks, maybe install cameras, but their words sounded like background noise. I knew. Whoever had done this hadn't broken in through brute force. They had known when I'd leave, how to get in, and what to take. They had planned it down to the smallest detail. I sat there until dawn, my body heavy but my mind racing. Every sound outside made me jump. Every shadow across the window stretched into something sinister. At one point I thought about driving to my mom's house and staying with her, but the thought of dragging her into this made me sick. She had enough to worry about with her health. I couldn't let her become part of it. The next morning, I called her just to hear her voice. She sounded fine, cheerful even, completely unaware of what had happened to me the night before. I told her I was just checking in, careful not to let the edge of my voice slip through. She laughed and told me I worried too much. That laugh, light and untroubled, broke something inside me. I wanted to protect her, but how do you protect someone when you can't even protect yourself? I bought a cheap security camera that afternoon and set it up by the front door. It gave me a small sense of control, but it wasn't real. I knew if they wanted to get in again, a little blinking red light wouldn't stop them. Still, I needed something, anything, to make me feel less powerless. Days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. The silence stretched so long that I almost convinced myself maybe it had just been a one-time thing. Maybe they had taken what they wanted and moved on. I kept telling myself that, repeating it like a prayer, even though deep down I knew it wasn't true. One night, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. The screen glowed in the dark, another local number I didn't recognize. My stomach twisted as I answered, bracing myself. But this time, no voice came. Just silence. I listened, my breath caught in my throat. Then a click, like someone hanging up. I stared at the phone for a long time after that, my mind spinning. Was it them again? Were they testing me, seeing if I'd run out of the house in a panic like before? Or were they reminding me that they could reach me whenever they wanted? The next day, I told myself I had to stop being afraid. I couldn't keep living like a hunted animal. I forced myself into a routine: work, groceries, checking on mom, coming home, locking up. I thought if I kept moving, if I acted normal, maybe the fear would fade. But it didn't. Because then I noticed something new. Small, almost invisible things at first. A chair slightly out of place. A cupboard door left ajar that I swore I had closed. Shoes by the door arranged differently than I remembered. Tiny details that anyone else would overlook. But not me. Not after what I had been through. I told myself I was imagining it, that paranoia was getting the better of me. But the more I tried to dismiss it, the more certain I became. Someone had been inside while I was gone. Not tearing things apart like before. Not leaving chaos in their wake. Just moving things. Quietly. Subtly. Enough to make me question myself. Enough to make me doubt my own memory. That was worse than the break-in. At least then I had proof. Now I had nothing but my own unraveling mind. I tried telling the police again, but they gave me the same tired lines. No signs of forced entry. Nothing stolen, no evidence. I could feel their patience thinning, like they saw me as some paranoid tenant crying wolf. Maybe I would have thought the same thing if I were them. But I knew what I felt. I knew the house wasn't mine anymore. I tried to catch whoever it was. I left the camera running constantly, repositioned it, checked the footage every night. But nothing ever showed. Just me coming and going. Just the empty doorway. It was like they knew exactly where the blind spots were. The worst moment came a few weeks later. I came home from work and noticed one of the empty frames on the shelf had been turned face down. No one else had a key. No one else should have been there. I stood in the middle of the room staring at that frame for what felt like hours, too scared to touch it, too scared not to. When I finally flipped it back up, I felt the air leave my lungs. Inside wasn't an empty backing anymore. A single photograph had been slipped in. Not one I had ever owned. It was me, sitting at my kitchen table, head bowed, eating dinner alone. The picture was recent. Days old. I dropped it, my hands trembling. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. Someone had been in my house while I sat there, completely unaware. Close enough to take a photo. Bold enough to leave it behind like a calling card. I called the police again, shoved the photo at them, begged them to see what I saw. But even then, they only shrugged. Maybe it was a prank, they said. Maybe I had enemies I didn't know about. Their words only deepened the hollow inside me. Because if the police couldn't help, who could? That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat at the kitchen table with every light in the house blazing, staring at the door, waiting for the sound of the lock, the whisper of a footstep, the shadow in the window. And for the first time, I realized they weren't just intruding on my house. They were intruding on me, my life, my sense of reality, my sanity. And I knew they weren't done. I don't know how long I sat there that night, staring at that photograph of myself. The edges trembled in my hands, the image burned into my eyes, me, at my own table, eating dinner. I couldn't even remember the exact night it had been taken. Maybe because it had been so ordinary. Just another evening where I came home, threw something together, and sat there in silence. But someone else had been in the room. Someone had been close enough to see me. Close enough to capture me, and I hadn't noticed a thing. Sleep became impossible after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a camera pointed at me. I imagined the faint click of a shutter in the dark. I imagined eyes on me, even when I was alone. I started unplugging every electronic in the house at night, just in case. I checked behind curtains, under the bed, inside closets, hunting for cameras that I never found. I stopped telling the police. What was the point? They hadn't believed me the first time, and now, with no proof besides my own unraveling nerves, they would only chalk me up as unstable. But I knew what was happening. This wasn't just a robbery anymore. It was a game. Whoever was doing this wanted me to feel exposed, to feel like every part of my life was on display. And it was working. Days blurred together. I barely ate. I barely left the house. I thought about moving, but I couldn't bear the thought of leaving my mom alone. She still didn't know any of it. I kept lying to her, telling her I was fine, that everything was normal. I told myself I was protecting her, but part of me wondered if I was just trying to protect myself from the guilt of seeing her worry. Then one night, I came home later than usual. My shift had run long, and by the time I parked in the driveway, it was close to midnight. The air was still, the street quiet. As I walked up the path, I felt it before I saw it, that prickling sensation, like being watched. My hand tightened on the keys, my eyes darting to the shadows. The front door looked normal, locked, untouched. But when I stepped inside, my chest tightened. The air was warm, heavy, and it smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. I don't smoke. I never have. I flicked on the light, and everything looked fine. No overturned furniture, no ransacked drawers. Just my house, exactly as I had left it. But I couldn't shake the smell, faint but undeniable. I walked slowly through each room, bed in hand, checking corners, closets, behind doors. Nothing. Every window locked. Every door bolted. It should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Because if someone had been there, they had left. Nothing behind except the smell. No chaos this time. No proof. Just a reminder that they could be inside whenever they wanted. I barely slept, dozing off in fits with the bat resting on my lap. Every creak made me jolt awake. Every gust of wind against the windows made my heart leap. The next morning, I decided to check the security camera I had set by the front door. I scrolled through the feed from the night before, my pulse climbing as I watched myself walk out to my car, drive away, then the camera recording nothing but darkness. Hours passed in the timeline. Nothing unusual. Then, at around 10:45, movement. A figure walked straight up to the porch, calm and steady, and stood at the door. They didn't knock. They didn't ring the bell. They just stood there. The figure was tall, their face hidden by a hood, their posture patient, like they were waiting. They remained there for 5 minutes. Not moving. Not trying to break in. Just waiting. Then, just as slowly, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. My stomach dropped as I realized the smell of smoke hadn't been my imagination. They had been there. Maybe they had gone around to the back. Maybe they had stood outside the windows, watching. Maybe they had even been inside, careful not to disturb a single thing. I replayed the footage again and again, pausing, zooming, searching for details that weren't there. The hood kept their face hidden. The camera was too cheap to catch more than shadows. But I knew deep down it was the same person. The same one who had stolen my photos. The same one who had left a picture of me behind. I didn't tell the police. What would I say? That someone had stood outside my house. They'd just shrug again. Instead, I called my landlord, asked him to replace the locks again, add more bolts, anything. He agreed, probably sensing my desperation, but his words didn't touch the fear coiling in my chest. Because the truth wasn't in the locks. The truth was that someone knew me. Knew my mom. Knew when I left, when I returned, when I ate, when I slept. Locks couldn't stop someone who already understood my patterns better than I did. That night, I sat in the kitchen with every light blazing, the bat across the table, the camera feed open on my phone. I told myself I'd stay awake, that I'd be ready if they came back. Hours passed, my eyelids growing heavier, my grip loosening. And just as sleep began to drag me under, I thought I heard it. A faint sound, not loud, not sharp. Just the soft scrape of footsteps outside the window. I froze, my breath caught in my chest, listening. The scrape came again. And in that moment I understood what the game really was. They weren't just watching me. They were waiting for me to break. When I moved back to my hometown, I told myself it was only temporary, just until my mom's health stabilized. She had been having small falls, nothing too serious, but enough to scare me. She brushed it off like she always did, stubborn as ever, but I knew better. So I packed up and found a small duplex 20 minutes away from her. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, one barely big enough to fit a bed, but it was close, and that was what mattered. I wanted to believe it would be the start of something steady, maybe even peaceful. I set up my furniture, hung my photos on the walls, tried to make it feel like a home. The evenings were quiet, the neighborhood calm. The kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. And for a while, I managed to trick myself into believing that quiet was safety. But deep down, I was always waiting for the phone call. The one that would tell me my mom had fallen again, this time worse. The one that would tell me I should have done more, pushed her harder to accept help. I lived with that tension every day, the knot in my stomach that only grew tighter. That call came one night when I was lying on the couch, half watching some old rerun on TV. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, but it was local, so I answered. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a nurse at the ER. Her tone was calm, professional, almost soothing. She told me my mother had been admitted after a fall. She had hit her head, but she was conscious, asking for me. My heart dropped. This was the nightmare I had been expecting. I didn't question her for a second. She knew my mom's full name. She knew her address. She even mentioned the hip replacement surgery from a few months back. How could I doubt her? I grabbed my keys, didn't even think to lock the door, and rushed to the car. The drive felt endless and instant all at once. My hands shook on the wheel, prayers tumbling from my lips as I begged for her to be alright. I replayed every moment of her laughter when I nagged her about safety, the way she had waved me off. And I hated myself for not forcing the issue harder. When I pushed through the ER doors and gave her name, the nurse at the desk blinked at me. She checked her screen, typed again, then shook her head. No one by that name had been admitted. Not that night. Not at all. I felt dizzy, like the floor had tilted under me. I explained, stammering, about the phone call, about the nurse who had told me everything. But she just looked at me with sympathy, told me maybe I had the wrong hospital. My gut twisted. This was the hospital closest to my mom. There was no mistake. I ran outside and called her landline. She answered after a few rings, her voice groggy, confused why I was calling so late. She had been asleep. No fall. No hospital. No nurse. That was when the truth slammed into me. The call had been a lie. A trap. I drove home like my car was on fire, praying I was wrong. But when I stepped through the door, I knew immediately. The air was wrong. Heavy. Disturbed. My living room had been gutted. My TV was gone, my laptop vanished, drawers yanked open and emptied. But it wasn't just the things that were missing. It was what they had chosen. The picture frames on my shelves had been left behind, but the photos inside them were gone. My prescription bottles from the bathroom medicine cabinet, emptied and missing. Not valuables. Not money. Not things a thief would normally care about. These were things that meant something to me, and someone had taken them deliberately. I stood there in the wreckage, my chest heaving, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. Who steals photographs? Who takes medicine bottles with my name printed on them? This wasn't a robbery. It was personal. I called the police, but even as I told them everything, I knew what they would say. They listened, they nodded, they wrote it down. But their eyes told me the truth. There was nothing they could do. The thieves were gone, and all I had left was the hollow shell of my home and the crushing knowledge that someone out there knew enough about me to play me like a puppet. That night, I sat in the ruined living room with the empty frames glowing in the lamplight, and I realized something that chilled me deeper than the loss of any possession. This wasn't about money. This wasn't about things. This was about me. Someone had chosen me, studied me, learned me. And if they could lure me out once, they could do it again. The worst part was knowing they weren't finished. I didn't sleep the night they robbed me. I couldn't even sit still. I kept walking through the house, over and over, staring at the places where my life had been stripped bare. The empty frames looked like mocking smiles, taunting me every time my eyes landed on them. Whoever had taken those photos knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't money they wanted, it was something personal. Something that cut deeper than valuables ever could. The police had already left, their notebooks filled with words that would lead nowhere. I knew it. They knew it. The thieves were gone. They had slipped into my life, torn it apart, and vanished into the night. And all I could do was sit there, listening to the silence, wondering when they'd decide to come back. Morning came like a blur. I called my mom, just to hear her voice. She sounded fine, cheerful. Even, with no idea what had happened. I told her I was tired, nothing more. I didn't dare tell her the truth. She'd panic. And besides, what could she do? She was already fragile enough without me piling my nightmares on top of her. That day, I went out and bought a small camera for the front door. It wasn't expensive, not even top quality, but it gave me something to cling to. A blinking red light that made me feel less alone. I screwed it into place, adjusted the angle, and tried to convince myself it would keep me safe. But deep down, I knew if they wanted in again, they would find a way. For a couple of weeks, nothing happened. The days crawled forward, each one wrapped in that heavy tension of waiting. Every time my phone rang, I tensed, expecting another fake call. Every time I turned my key in the lock, I braced myself to find my home gutted again. But the silence stretched on, long enough that I started to believe maybe they'd had their fun and moved on. Then, one night, the phone rang. Another local number I didn't recognize. My blood went cold as I stared at the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. This time, there was no calm voice pretending to be a nurse. No explanation. Just silence. Long, steady, unsettling silence. I whispered hello, my voice cracking, but there was no reply. Just faint static, like someone was there but refusing to speak. Then a click, and the line went dead. I sat there frozen, the phone still in my hand, my heart hammering. Was it them? Was it their way of reminding me they were still out there, watching, waiting? The next day, I forced myself to act normal. I went to work, I checked on my mom, I even grabbed groceries like nothing had happened. But inside, I was unraveling. I started noticing small things, tiny details that shouldn't have mattered but gnawed at me all the same. A chair, slightly out of place. A cupboard door open that I swore I had closed. Shoes by the door, arranged differently than I remembered. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. My mind playing tricks, feeding on fear. But the more I noticed, the more certain I became. Someone had been inside again. Not tearing the place apart this time. Not stealing. Just moving things. Subtle enough to make me doubt myself. Subtle enough to make me question my own memory. That was worse than the robbery. At least then I had proof. Now I had nothing but doubt. I tried to catch them. I checked the footage on my little camera every night, scrolling through hours of empty frames, waiting for a shadow, a face, anything. But it never showed. Just me. Leaving. Me returning. Nothing in between. It was like they knew exactly where the blind spots were. The breaking point came on a gray Thursday evening. I had just gotten home, set down my keys, and glanced at the shelf where the empty frames still sat. And that's when I froze. One of the frames had been flipped over, face down. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, every instinct screaming at me to leave it alone. But I reached for it anyway, my hand trembling. When I turned it over, my knees almost buckled. Inside the frame wasn't an empty backing anymore. It was a photograph of me, sitting at my kitchen table, eating dinner. The picture had been taken just days earlier. The fork was in my hand, my head bent slightly, the same shirt I'd worn Monday night. I had no memory of anyone being there, no sound, no shadow, nothing. But someone had been close enough to take a picture, and bold enough to slip it into the frame like a message. I dropped it, my hands shaking, bile rising in my throat. My own house, my own table. They had been inside while I was living, breathing, completely unaware. I called the police, shoving the photo at them like it was proof of everything I'd said. But even then, their faces didn't change. They shrugged. Maybe it was a prank, maybe I had enemies I didn't know about. Their words only deepened the hollow inside me. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with every light on, the bed across my lap, staring at the door. Every sound outside, every car that passed, every whisper of the wind felt like it was aimed at me. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't about my house anymore. It wasn't about things being stolen or broken. It was about me, my life, my sanity. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, they weren't finished. I kept that photo of myself hidden in a drawer, face down, because I couldn't stand to look at it. But it didn't matter. It lived in my mind, burned there like a scar. Every time I sat at the kitchen table, I imagined the unseen photographer standing just beyond my vision. Every time I took a bite of food, I wondered if another photo was being taken in that exact moment. The worst part was knowing I would never know. I stopped inviting anyone over. Friends noticed the change, of course. They asked why I seemed distracted, why I'd barely left the house anymore. I gave excuses, work stress, bad sleep, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I? How do you explain that someone is slipping into your life, taking pieces of it, leaving trophies behind just to prove they can? For a while, nothing happened. No calls, no stolen items, no new photos tucked into frames. The stillness should have comforted me, but it didn't. It felt like the pause before something worse. A silence filled with intent. I began to wonder if that was the real trick, not the robbery. Not the photo, but the waiting. Making me live in dread of what I couldn't see. Then one night, something shifted. I came home late, nearly midnight, after staying longer than usual at my mom's place. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. The air felt wrong. Again, heavy, stale. I turned on the light, and at first glance, everything looked fine. Nothing overturned, no drawers opened. But then I noticed the smell. Faint, but undeniable. Cigarette. Smoke. I don't smoke. No one I know smokes. The hairs on my neck stood on end as I walked from room to room. The smell lingered strongest in the living room, then faded as I moved down the hall. I checked every closet, every corner. The bat clenched in my hand, but there was no one there. No sign of forced entry. Nothing missing. Just the smell. I barely slept, sitting upright on the couch with the bat across my knees, jumping at every creak. In the morning, I checked the front door camera. I scrolled through the footage, watched myself leave, then hours of nothing. Until 10:45 p.m. A figure appeared. They walked right up to the porch, hood pulled over their head, hands in their pockets. They didn't knock. They didn't ring. They just stood there. For minutes. Motionless. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart thudding. The figure never moved closer, never tried the door. They simply waited. Then, after what felt like forever, they turned and walked away. I replayed the clip again and again. The hood hid their face, the footage too grainy to catch details, but the posture, the calmness, it had to be them. The same person who had left the photo. The same person who had robbed me blind with a single phone call. I didn't bother calling the police this time. What would I say? that someone had stood on my porch? They'd dismiss me again, tell me to lock my doors and try to sleep. So I kept it to myself. But that night, when I turned off the lights, I couldn't escape the image of that hooded figure. Standing so still, so patient, as if waiting for the right moment to come inside. The days after blurred together. I installed more locks, added extra bolts, checked the camera, feed every hour. But the fear wasn't in the door anymore. It was in me. Because I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Whoever this was didn't need to break in anymore. They already had. Into my head. Into my life. It only got worse. One evening I came home from work and noticed the closet door in the hallway slightly open. I always kept it shut. I was sure of it. My skin crawled as I approached, the bat in my hand. Slowly, I pulled it open, half expecting someone to be inside. But it was empty. Just coats and boxes. Still, my heart pounded because I knew it hadn't been like that when I left. Later that night, when I finally forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, I couldn't stop glancing at the shelf where the frames were. I'd flipped them all face down after finding that photo, but I knew I'd have to check. My stomach twisted as I picked one up and turned it over. Relief washed through me when I saw nothing. Just the cardboard backing. But as I set it down, I realized something worse. The frame wasn't empty. It had been cleaned. The backing was spotless, no dust, no smudges. As if someone had taken it out and wiped it down before placing it back. My breath caught in my throat. They hadn't just been here. They'd touched everything. That was when the phone rang. The same local number pattern. My hands shook as I answered. Silence. Not even static this time. Just the sound of someone breathing. Steady. Calm. I whispered hello, my voice trembling, but they didn't answer. They just breathed. Then the line went dead. I sat there frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. My pulse pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. I wanted to scream, to run, to call someone, anyone, but I couldn't move. Because, deep down, I knew the truth. They were in control now. And I realized with a cold certainty, they weren't just intruding on my home anymore. They were intruding on me, my life, my mind. And there was nothing I could do to stop them. I didn't realize how much the breathing on the other end of the line would haunt me. It was worse than words, worse than threats, because it was proof. Proof that there was a person on the other end, alive, deliberate, calm enough to just listen to me crumble in silence. I kept replaying it in my mind, that steady rhythm of air, the reminder that they weren't just watching me from a distance, they were close enough to let me hear them. I unplugged the phone that night, powered it off, shoved it in a drawer. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even sit still. I walked the halls of the duplex with the bat in my hand, flicking on lights in every room, checking locks I had already checked 3 times. My reflection in the window looked like a stranger, dark circles under my eyes, sweat plastered to my hair, a hollow look I didn't recognize. By morning, I thought maybe I'd gone too far. Maybe it was paranoia chewing me alive. But then, I stepped outside and saw it, footprints in the damp soil beneath my living room window. Clear, fresh, pressed deep like someone had stood there for hours. My breath caught. They hadn't just been outside my door. They had been under my window, watching me while I slept. I snapped photos of the prints, called the police, begged them to come. They arrived, glanced at the dirt, and shrugged. No way to prove when the prints had been made, no way to link them to anyone. I showed them the photo from the frame again, desperate, but they just exchanged looks, the kind that said they were humoring me. They wrote a report, promised to increase patrols, then left me alone in the house that didn't feel like mine anymore. That was when I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and drove to my mom's place, telling her I wanted to stay for a few nights. She didn't ask many questions, just smiled, happy to have company. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of relief. Sitting at her kitchen table, eating the dinner she made, I almost convinced myself it was enough. But even there, I couldn't relax. Every sound outside made me tense. Every time her phone rang, I jumped. I didn't tell her what was happening. I couldn't. She would panic, and I couldn't bear to add that weight to her already fragile shoulders. So I kept it inside, swallowing the fear, while smiling across the table at her. After a few nights, I forced myself to go back to the duplex. I couldn't hide forever. My mom needed her space, and I couldn't let whoever was tormenting me win. The moment I stepped inside, though, I knew I had made a mistake. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. But on the kitchen table sat a single item I hadn't placed. There. A photograph. Not tucked into a frame this time. Not hidden. Just waiting. It was me again. This time, asleep on the couch, the bat across my chest, the TV flickering in the background. My heart lurched into my throat as I stared at it. I had no memory of anyone being there. No sound, no light, no movement. But someone had stood in my living room long enough to take a picture of me sleeping, and then had left it behind like a trophy. I backed away from the table, shaking, bile burning in my throat. I called the police again. Shouted into the phone about the photo, demanded they send someone. When the officer arrived, I shoved the picture at him, my voice cracking as I explained. He studied it, frowned, then finally admitted something that chilled me more than silence. "If this is real," he said quietly, "then they're not just breaking in. They're watching you. Playing with you." It was the first time any of them had acknowledged what I already knew. But even then, there was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no suspect, no evidence beyond the photo itself. They left, telling me to be careful, to consider staying somewhere else. But I knew it wouldn't matter, because this wasn't about the house. It was about me. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the center of the living room, every light blazing, the bat gripped so tight my knuckles ached. The photo lay on the table beside me, its image seared into my brain. Hours crawled by, silence pressing down until it felt suffocating. Then, sometime past 3 a.m., I heard it. A faint creak, like weight shifting on old wood. My head snapped toward the sound, my breath caught in my chest. Another creak, closer this time. My stomach nodded. I raised the bat, every muscle trembling, listening. The sound stopped. The silence stretched on. I sat there frozen, waiting for the next noise, the next shadow, the next reminder that I wasn't alone. But nothing came. When dawn finally broke, I was still sitting there, my body stiff, my eyes burning from lack of sleep. I hadn't moved all night. And yet, when I finally rose and stepped toward the door, I saw it. Another photograph slipped under the front door while I sat awake inside. This one was different. It wasn't of me. It was of my mom. standing at her kitchen sink, washing dishes, her face turned slightly away. The room spun around me as I clutched the photo, my knees threatening to give out. They hadn't just been watching me. They had been watching her. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't just about intrusion anymore. This was a message. A warning. They could reach anyone I loved. I must have stared at that photograph of my mom for an hour before I moved. My hands shook so violently I almost tore it in half. It wasn't just me anymore. It was her. The one person I'd sworn to protect, the reason I'd moved back in the first place. And now they were telling me, without words, that she was part of their game. I drove to her house in a panic, my foot heavy on the gas, the photo burning a hole in my pocket. She was fine, of course, standing in the doorway, surprised to see me so early, asking if something was wrong. I couldn't bring myself to tell her. How could I? What would I even say? That someone had been close enough to photograph her in her own kitchen? That while she hummed to herself over the sink, believing she was safe, eyes had been on her? I lied. I told her I was just checking in, that I had woken up restless and wanted to see her. She smiled and went back to her morning, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I sat at her table, watching her every move, half expecting someone to crash through the window at any second. But nothing happened. When I returned to my duplex later that day, the photo was still there on the table. I slid it into a drawer, but that didn't hide it. Every time I walked past, I felt it staring at me. A reminder that I wasn't in control. That they could reach her whenever they wanted. The following nights blurred into one another. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every sound outside made me grab the bat and creep to the window. Every buzz of my phone made my chest seize. I couldn't concentrate at work. I couldn't focus when I visited my mom. My life became a cycle of dread and exhaustion. Then came the night I broke. It was just after midnight when I heard it again. The soft scrape outside the window, the sound that had haunted me before. I froze, every nerve in my body lit up. I grabbed the bat and moved silently toward the sound, my breath shallow, my heart pounding. The scrape came again. Closer this time, as if someone was shifting their weight just inches from the wall. I yanked the curtain aside, expecting to see a shadow. But there was nothing. Just the dark yard, still and empty. My pulse thundered in my ears as I scanned every inch, searching for movement. Nothing. I turned away, trying to convince myself I was imagining it, when I heard it. A click. Soft, deliberate. The sound of a lock turning. I spun around. The front door was moving, inching open, as if someone had slipped the key into the bolt as casually as a homeowner returning from work. My grip tightened on the bat, sweat dripping down my temple. I shouted, my voice breaking, demanding they stop. The door swung wider, spilling a sliver of night into the room. Then a shape appeared in the doorway. Tall, hooded, calm. They didn't rush. They didn't stumble. They stepped inside as if they belonged there. I raised the bat, my arms shaking, but they didn't flinch. They simply lifted a hand and placed something on the floor. A photograph. Then they stepped back, eyes locked on mine, silent, unhurried. And just like that, they slipped back into the night, pulling the door closed behind them. My body locked up. I couldn't move. The bat slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. Slowly, I forced myself forward and picked up the photo. This one wasn't of me. It wasn't of my mom. It was of both of us. Taken the day before, in her kitchen. Me sitting at the table, her standing at the sink, both of us. Unaware. I staggered back, the photos shaking in my grip. They had been in her house. Watching us. Close enough to capture us together. My vision swam as I realized the truth. No place was safe. Not hers. Not mine. Not anywhere. I called the police again, my words spilling out in a frenzy. They came, they searched, they listened, but as always, they left me with nothing. No evidence, no answers. Just the same tired reassurances that meant nothing. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. I drove for hours, checking my mirrors, convinced headlights were following me. I slept in the car at a rest stop, the photo still in my pocket, a constant reminder. I didn't return to the duplex. I broke the lease, left most of my things behind, moved into a small, furnished apartment across town. I changed my number, bought a new phone, stopped answering calls I didn't recognize. I even convinced my mom to let me install cameras around her house, telling her it was just for peace of mind. She still doesn't know the truth. She can't. But even in the new apartment, the fear followed me. Some nights I swear I hear footsteps in the hall. Some mornings I wake certain that something has been moved. And every time the phone rings, I hesitate before answering, terrified of hearing silence. The police never found anyone. The photos were never traced. No suspects, no leads, nothing. Just a trail of fear left behind in the shape of stolen memories and stolen safety. I've tried to move on, to rebuild. But the truth is, I'll never escape it. Because once you know, someone can slip into your life, into your home, into the spaces you thought were yours alone. You can't unknow it. Once you've seen proof that someone is always watching, always waiting, you can't ever feel safe again. Sometimes, when I visit my mom, I catch myself staring out the window, scanning the yard, half expecting to see that hooded figure standing there, patient, certain, waiting. And sometimes, in the quiet of my own apartment, I pull out the last photo they left behind, the one of me and her together, and I stare at it until my hands tremble. Because the truth I can't outrun, no matter where I go, is that they weren't finished. They never said it out loud, but I could hear it in their silence, see it in their certainty. This wasn't over.